Good afternoon. My name is Min Kyu Lee. I'm the Dean of the School of Journalism, Chungang University, which is the oldest university in our country for journalism matter. Very nice to meet you. And we're going to have two sessions for this afternoon. And first, there will be the presentation about the role of the journalist in ensuring peace on the Korean Peninsula. Each panelist has about 25 minutes presentation and then Q&A session. So we will order by alphabetical order. So first, I will introduce Zhu Xiaochen from China, and Teresa Fitzner from Germany, Teguh Santosa from Indonesia, and last, Alex Talkio from United States. So very cozy, and we are not very big audience, so just relax and listen to the presentation and tell us about how we be ensuring peace in the Korean Peninsula. So first, we will present Zhu Xiaochen about from Shanghai News Group about media responsibility and world peace. Zhu? Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, and ladies and gentlemen, my dear colleagues, good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to come to the beautiful city of Seoul in the wonderful season of spring to participate in this year's World Journalist Conference. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for their kind invitation, careful preparation, and arrangements for this meeting. It is also a great honor for me to meet journalists from all around the world and share views on world peace and media responsibility, especially regarding the current situation on the Korean Peninsula. China is connected to Korean Peninsula, and Shanghai is the seat of the provisional government of the Republic of Korea. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the founding of the provisional government of the ROC in Shanghai. As a journalist from Shanghai representing China media to attend this conference in Seoul, I feel a sense of intimacy and history. Just as the winter snow is melting away and spring returns, the political tensions on the Korean Peninsula have loosened up, showing signs of peace. A month ago, the second meeting between the leaders of the DPRK and the United States was held in Hanoi, Vietnam. More than 3,000 journalists from around the world went there and reported on the summit. The Shanghai Media Group, this is the organization which I belong to, also sent reporters to cover this important meeting, together with reporters from other Chinese media. Although the summit did not result in reaching an agreement as hoped by all parties, the general direction on the issues of Korean Peninsula became clearer through dialogue and political reconciliation. The Chinese media has always paid attention to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the lasting peace and stability of the region. We are pleased to see the series of important and positive changes have taken place on the peninsula since 2018. During the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in February 2018, the relationship between the DPRK and ROK has achieved a turnaround, ushering in a new chapter of reconciliation and cooperation. In April, with the world looking on, leaders of the two countries stepped across the military demarcation line in Panmunjom, hand in hand, taking the first step forward. In June, the DPRK and the United States held a historic summit in Singapore. The two sides reached important common understanding on full denuclearization and the building of a peace regime on the peninsula. In September, leaders from the DPRK and RK held their third summit and signed the Pyongyang Joint Declaration. Inter-Korean relations have achieved full recovery as the two sides jointly undertook turning the peninsula into a peaceful homeland, free of nuclear weapons and nuclear threats. In February of this year, the two Koreas have applied to jointly participate in some of the events of the 2020 Tokyo Summer Olympics, and both countries proposed an initiative to jointly bid for the 2032 Summer Olympics. These actions show that both sides hope to continue building bridges that demonstrate the power of unity and the will to promote peace. The Chinese media has covered all these efforts that actively advance the peace process, demonstrating the wishes of the Chinese journalists and the Chinese people for a positive and peaceful future with and for their close neighbors. The Chinese government is also very happy to see the developments toward the peaceful resolution on the peninsula. This is in line with China's consistent views of many years. First, to achieve denuclearization of the peninsula, and second, to achieve and maintain the lasting and peace and stability on the peninsula and then in Northeast Asia. However, 3 feet of ice on the result of a single cold day, the achievement of peace on the peninsula will not happen instantly. No one should expect the peninsula issue to be resolved in just one day. It requires all parties to continue to demonstrate sincerity and goodwill, resolve confrontations, and foster trust. As Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said, where there is a will, there is a way. The Foreign Minister also pointed out ups and downs on the peninsula over the past several decades show that dialogue and consultation is the only way out, and only meeting each other halfway can ensure steady progress on the right course. Peaceful development is the eternal theme of human society. A peaceful resolution on the peninsula requires the joint efforts of all parties, including, of course, the efforts of the media. The media should rely on their advantages in order to make their contribution and play a unique role in realizing this goal of world peace and peace on the Korean Peninsula. In my opinion, the media must serve as a disseminator of the peace concept, the revealers of truths, and the guardians of social credibility. First of all, in the process of reporting the situation on the peninsula and advocating for world peace, the media should disseminate the concept of peace, guiding the public to profoundly understand the dangers of war and therefore opposing war and cherishing peace. In the past century, human society has experienced 2 world wars that have caused great sufferings to all the people of virtually every country. During the wars, millions of people became homeless, with countless families ruined. War has sowed the seeds of hatred and estrangement between people and places. Though more than 70 years have passed since World War II, the threat of war still lingers, showing itself in various forms of recurring violent hostilities like regional conflicts, civil war, and terrorist activities. World peace has not yet been attained. As journalists, when we report on world events, we are also influencing and shaping public perception of the world. Therefore, media is an indispensable power to guide societies and the public. Although 2 world wars taught humankind painful lessons, the memory of pain gradually fades over time. Younger generations who have not experienced war cannot understand the suffering it causes and the tragedy it brings without guidance and education. In the media, we can use various ways to display and depict. We can use photos, pictures, interviews, and first-hand audiovisual materials to tell stories. Because of the multi ways of storytelling that media can adopt, they are much more vivid and touching compared to the articles and the books, and therefore more shareable and more visible to the general public. Therefore, we, as media workers, must understand the importance of a role in the pursuit of peace, how vital it is to reflect on and represent history in an objective and rational manner, guiding the public to draw lessons from history in order not to repeat the tragedy of war. Secondly, the media should uphold the spirit of professionalism, uncover the truth, and help the public to understand the outside world objectively, truthfully, comprehensively, and accurately. There's an old saying in China that to listen to both sides, one is enlightened. To hate only one side, one is benighted. It means that you must listen to opinions from both sides to get a full understanding. I think this applies also to media reports. In our reporting, have we just adopted one side's point of view and without reflecting the other? There's another Chinese old saying that says, what you hear is imaginary, what you see is true, emphasizing that what has only been heard is unreliable. To know the truth, we must see it for ourselves. As media reporters, we should not easily believe and spread information that we hear. We need to find the facts and speak the truth. Thirdly, the mainstream media must adapt to the new media environment in order to become the source of the public's access to accurate information to enhance and maintain social credibility. In recent years, the media environment has undergone tremendous changes, entering the so-called all media or new media era. As long as one has constant access to information and the ability to disseminate it, everyone is a journalist who can share information freely. However, the authenticity of this information is difficult to distinguish. Often, the release and reprint of network information has no reliable source and can even be maliciously fabricated, hyped up, and exaggerated. What's more, some terrorist organizations also use the internet and social media as tools to send information freely in order to mislead the public and spread hatred. In the face of unprecedented challenges, the mainstream media should adhere to the professional news production process and to our standards and values. At the same time, the mainstream media must embrace new technologies and use this as a means of communication to disseminate information through the internet and social platforms. Only in this way can we maintain the credibility of the mainstream media and guide public opinion, transmitting positive energy by playing our unique role in promoting world peace, especially on the peninsula. Currently, the situation on the peninsula is full of twists and turns, and the peace process has entered a vital stage in which difficulties and challenges are inevitable. However, as the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, the road to happiness is full of hardships, but the future is more and more promising. We firmly hope and believe that as long as the parties work together with common and strong desire for peace, a springtime of peace on the peninsula will surely come in the end. Finally, thank you all for the attention. I wish the conference a great success. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhao Jian. And she mentioned very important three subjects. The page number is 21 through 23. She mentioned three subjects about how we discussed. So, any other question about Zhao Jian's presentation? Any question and some remark? We have plenty of time. About 10 minutes, we have time for Zhao Jian's presentation. Thank you, Zhao Jian. After we finish, we have some a group discussion. Oh, there's one question. Yeah.
I'm Kuber from Nepal. What is the role that China is playing in pursuing North and South to come to the same table and have discussion to form this unification?
Thank you. I think China has always played a very positive and active role in promoting the denuclearization peace talk among the two parties. With concerted efforts from all sides, the direction of the issue of the Korean Peninsula has moved to peace talk. China has been the views of the Korean Peninsula has remained the same for many, many years. That is to achieve denuclearization of the peninsula and also to achieve peace and lasting stability on the peninsula and also Northeast Asia. There's an old saying in China that 好事多磨, that means that the road to happiness is full of hardships. So we see some twists and turns and difficulties maybe remaining, but we think that every party should remain, peace talk. That's the only way out. So I think currently, we have to accommodate to each party's legitimate concerns and move halfway and, advance peace process in a phase step-by-step way. Okay, I hope that I can answer your question.
Yes. China is a very important role to negotiate between North and South and United States and North Korea. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, next, thank you. Thank you, Zhao Jun. Next presenter is Teresa Pritzner from Die Welt, and she will present about the way how we report can make a difference.
So, dear colleagues, it is an honor and a pleasure, of course, to participate in this conference. And I'm looking forward to a week of fruitful discussions with colleagues from all over the world. My name is Teresa Pritzner, as I was already introduced, and I work for the foreign desk of the newspaper Die Welt. We are one of the leading daily newspapers in Germany, but however, the thoughts I'm expressing in this talk are, of course, just my own. And I am looking forward to discussing them with you after my presentation. So we gathered here from different countries, but what we all share is our keen interest in gaining a better understanding of the Korean Peninsula. Many of us, myself included, are here in Korea for the first time. And our perception of the two Koreas is shaped by what we learn from history books, what we see on social media, but also, first and foremost, by the media. It is the reporting of our national and international colleagues, may it be what we see on the news, the articles we read, or the features and podcasts we are listening to, that keeps creating on how we view the Korean Peninsula, a region of the world that is, despite that it only has the size of Great Britain, comprising such elementary contrasts. While South Korea, on the one hand, is associated with an economical success story, hypermodernity, and cultural phenomena like K-pop and K-beauty, North Korea has become somehow a synonym for a constant nuclear threat, violation of human rights, and the suppression of the population by its own government. And most of all, the Korean Peninsula is known for being the scenery of one of the big unsolved conflicts of our time. So the title of this conference is The Role of Journalists in Ensuring Peace on the Korean Peninsula. But I personally think that this is kind of misleading. Neither lies in the power of journalists to ensure peace, nor is it actually our task. Although we all hope for peace, journalism and activism cannot and shall not be mixed, even if it is for such a noble goal. All we can do is to report what is happening. But in such a vulnerable context, the way how we report things can make a difference. Obviously, we are all committed to the principles of accuracy, independence, and impartiality. And of course, we should always put accuracy over speed, and especially take our time to double-check information when social media is going wild again. But obviously, those are the essentials of responsible journalism and indispensable in reporting about any topic. But especially in such a vulnerable context as the conflict of the two Koreas, we should be extra careful not to follow the same dominant narratives again and again. We should monitor ourselves closely about not falling into recreating stereotypes, or even worse, actually accidentally contributing to propaganda, from which side it may come. What do I mean by that? So let me give you an example. Of course, we have to report if Kim Jong-un is threatening the United States with a nuclear strike. But we also have to keep in mind and emphasize it in our reporting that such threats by North Korea against other countries are happening on a regular basis. They are a key part of the propaganda of a regime. They want to portray themselves as a military and nuclear power of whom the world should be afraid of. The media, so all of us, must be careful not to contribute to this plan by taking over their rhetoric, by quoting their threats in our headlines, and by showing footage of marching soldiers in Pyongyang. By that, we are displaying exactly the image they want us to, and nobody knows to which extent these pictures actually match reality in North Korea. So thus, we need to stay extra skeptical. In general, as well as for this particular conflict, we should be careful not to give our attention to the one who is shouting the loudest. Deliberate provocations are being used as a tool to get the attention of the media and therefore the attention of the public. May it be the tweets of US President Donald Trump or the hate speech that comes from certain populist parties in Europe. We have to report about them and what they do. But we do not have to shower them with attention for each and every of their provocations. Journalists should not play along in that game anymore. We already did this for too long. And we also should keep that in mind when reporting about the conflict on the Korean Peninsula. Another thought that came to my mind when I read the title of this conference, The Role of Journalists in Ensuring Peace on the Korean Peninsula, what could peace actually mean in this context? Reforms in North Korea? A North Korea without nuclear weapons? A reunification? Two countries, but an open border? Not too long ago, Germany was a divided country. And I really have to emphasize that the political and historical context and the nature of the separation of Germany were very different to the conflict we see on the Korean Peninsula, so we should always be a bit careful with comparisons. But what the people of Germany share with the people of two Koreas is the experience of families and friends and the whole nation being separated by political decisions and political interests, and that for decades. I did not witness the separation firsthand. I was only born in 1991, so 2 years after the fall of the wall that separated Germany, as well as Berlin, the capital. Probably you would ask me, why would I even bring that up, as I was born after the reunification? But now, 30 years after that wall was torn down, the process of a reunification in Germany is still not finished, formally almost in every way. But speaking of the people's minds, you can still feel the impact of the separation of a country for 40 years. It lasts sometimes, in some cases, until today. Many people in Germany still speak and think of those from the West, those from the East. There are certain stereotypes that remained. People have different perceptions of historical events that happened during the separation. For many people, also my family, that lived in the former German Democratic Republic, so in the East, The fall of a wall was a major break in their lives, in their biographies, their identities even. They had to adapt to completely new and different circumstances, and some people did that very successfully, but some people still struggle today. So, should there be peace, in whatever form, on the Korean Peninsula one day, reconciliation will require a lot of efforts, strength, and goodwill from the people, and most of all, it will require mutual understanding. The latter could be promoted by empathetic reporting, beyond stereotypes and populism, so something that we all could hopefully contribute. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Teresa. And she had a great presentation about her experience about reunification for German, East and West German. And since we have plenty of time, we're going to have some big group discussion after we finish session. So I think if we have some like urgent question, just ask, okay, and then we will have a group talk after we finish all sessions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Costa Rica. In Latin America, we feel that this problem, the problem of the peninsula, is an Asian problem, but I think it's a global problem between United States and China, and maybe you can explain us how countries like Latin America, that we don't have, any position in this situation, can help or can support for a better result.
Actually, I'm probably not an expert in that field, but what I can say that although, as I said, we have to be very careful with comparison, the reunification of Germany was also just possible because it was embedded in a strong international cooperation. So I guess this is actually also key for the Korean Peninsula. Although when talking about Germany, it was more of a multilateral effort which has to be taken for reunification, and in Korea it is not. It is actually more bilateral. I think the support of the international community is still key, but I am actually not so sure if I am the right person to address when it comes to the involvement of the countries in Latin America. So yeah, probably we have some other experts here who could answer this question better than I could.
Thank you, Teresa. Okay. Another question from France.
Hello, good afternoon. I am coming from France. Just two little points on German reunification and inter-Korean dialogue. I think there is a big difference. I mean, maybe the biggest one is that the Germans didn't fight a war against each other. That's, I think, the biggest difference, whatever cultural, economy, or multilateral context. And also for Korea, you had China and the States fighting. So we cannot, if it was only a bilateral problem, it would have been solved for a long time, right? But it's not the case. And second remark is about, I totally agree on the fact that we have to be extra careful about the propaganda from the north, or whatever it comes from, because the propaganda is coming from every actors of the region. So we have to be extra careful. Japan, South Korea, North Korea, China, Russia, they all have their propaganda. But when it's a democracy, we say it's communication, and when it's a dictatorship, we say propaganda. So we have to be careful. But I just noticed that when you have the missiles or the nuclear test, what is your chief editor asking you? It's the front page, right? And look at the peace process for 1 year now. Less and less headlines on the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. So that means there is also this sensationalism about the threat and also in the peace. Peace is much less interesting rather than the threat of war. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to promote? In a way, I agree on the misleading title, but if we don't follow the peace process as much as we follow the threat of war, we have a problem.
I think you underlined some of the points of my presentation, as I said. Comparisons, even actually in historical contexts, always we have to be very careful about that. And I completely agree with your point on the, I don't know how you phrased it, sensationalization. Definitely. And as I said, we have to be careful from propaganda, from which side it may come, as I said in my presentation.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ave. I'm from Haaretz in Tel Aviv. Just again, I agreed with the way you presented the importance of reporting and not falling into various traps of reporting, which ties in very well with what our French colleague just said. Just one question. One aspect of traditional or mainstream journalism, also in your newspapers, of course, is, I mean, you were talking about reportage, but there's also the tradition of opinion, like column writers and opinion writers, and it's a very long tradition, and in many years, some opinion writers were very influential. And I wanted to ask you if you think in these times, is this part of journalism still influential, is still important in balancing, for example, the tendency to sensationalize headlines, etc. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. To be honest, I mean, we can discuss this, but I think good opinion writers are more important than ever, because as our colleague from China said in her presentation, everybody actually has the means today to do journalism. You can do journalism with a smartphone, but it's not journalism the way how you would do it if you were educated in this field. So probably you would just report your opinion and sell it as facts. But if you have like quality newspapers who really make sure that there's the distinction between opinion, news, report, then I think good opinion writers are more important than ever, because they can give very informed statement. They can actually give impulses to the debate so that it advances. And I think it's just very important to keep telling the people that in quality media, you really have to see the distinction. And of course, journalists should also stick to that. And and I also think that probably it is even the task and the job of opinion writers to sometimes go a bit too far, so the debate can advance, so they can really give new impulses. Sometimes probably they also have to be wrong or provocative. I mean, that happens if you have a strong opinion. But as long as it is clearly separated on the page, I mean, also layout plays a big role there, that you really separate opinions. And then I think it's sometimes even all right to be provocative, so you have new thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Terence. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for your attention.
Yeah. Next presenter will Teguh Santosa from Indonesia. He's the member of Ethical Council Indonesian Journalists Association, and he will present about covering Korean Peninsula's peace agenda. Teguh.
Okay. To make it the forum more cheer up. 1, 2, 3. Okay, guys. Professor Lee, thank you for the opportunity. Colleagues from all over the world. So before I get into the main part of my speech regarding to the Korean Peninsula, I would like to share some of my basic principles in working as a journalist. The main reason why I would like to work as a journalist is because I cannot, or it is hard for me, to believe in any story that I read, I watch, and I listen. It is not because I simply don't believe the source, the person, or the media, but it is because I think and believe that as a human being, anyone has a natural difficulty that cannot be solved until today. Any human being cannot be at more than one place at one time. Any human being lives in his or her time and space. When something happens outside, we depend on someone or agent to let us know about what happened. Of course, the person that we depend on will tell us the story based on his or her understanding or framing. In the practice of journalism, that person is us, journalists. We suppose that we are meant to voice the voiceless, to defend the oppressed from the oppressor, to maintain the peace and to make sure that there is no one left behind the civilization. We truly know the power of information, yet many say that media is the best weapon ever invented by a human being. Therefore, we agreed on a set of ethics and code of conduct in journalism. Basically, it is a self-made limitation to control us in doing our profession. And also, nowadays, we've seen how the nature of and the landscape of information have changed, and it moved to the more complex level. Too many information, and yet the time that we need to understand the whole context is so limited. It seems like today, we tend to set our beliefs and values at the first time, and only after that fixed and permanent, then we apply what we have seen as fact within that belief. This is what we call as a post-truth, when belief comes first, and the way we are looking at the fact are adjusted following the belief. Based on this primary understanding, I think it is very important for us to complete the puzzle of facts and values by reporting the parts or the portions that maybe not many or even no one wants to cover it, like the Democratic People's Republics of Korea or simply North Korea. My first visit to North Korea was in April 2003. It's like 14 years ago. So you would see different person back then in 2003. We all remember those days were times when the slogan of war on terrorism and axis of evil color our editorial and our mindset in setting values in each story. In one of his speeches, President Bush of US sealed North Korea as a member of the axis of evil next to Iraq and Iran. The seal was also in my head before I departed from Jakarta to Beijing, and actually many friends tried to stop me, worried that the worst could happen there. But I found Pyongyang was a fine city, quiet, big roads, nice people are everywhere. At first, I worried if it was a situation like in Truman Show movie. Any of you maybe seen the movie already, yeah? Truman Show movie from 1998, and it is satirical fiction movie starred by Jim Carrey, so it is a good movie, yeah? Because the star is Jim Carrey, so it is a good movie. And it is about a life of Truman Burbank, the name of the fictional character in that movie. He lives in a super giant studio, and he believes that studio is the real world. And he met people, nice people surrounding him, and actually they were not common people, they were actors carrying out specific roles given by the directors. So, back to Pyongyang in 2003, as everything looked beautiful on the way from the airport to the Haibangsan Hotel in the city center, just a few blocks from Kim Il-sung Square, it had crossed my mind whether I or those people who look fine were Truman Burbank. My question was answered as soon as I arrived in the hotel and stepped into my hotel room. In 2003, the condition of the hotel was not that good. Not many lights were on. The corridor to the hotel rooms was also dim. And there was only one light that shone just in front of my room. Yeah, you know that the energy crisis forced North Korea at the time to save on the use of electricity equipment. And I returned to North Korea 9 years later, also in April, only a few months after Kim Jong-un was elected as the new leaders of the country, following the death of his father Kim Jong-il in December 2011. In April 2012, Pyongyang was filled with no less than 1,000 of journalists who came from various countries in the world. They came to North Korea to cover the North Korea plans when they are about to launch a satellite into the space. The Yanggakdo Hotel backyard looked like a mini TV studio. The news anchor gave a report by standing back to the Taedong River and Juche Tower, while in the lobby of hotel, hundreds of journalists, reporters, they went here and there with the LO to visit several places in Pyongyang and so on and so on. And at the end, all of us, we gathered in Kim Il-sung Square, listened to Kim Jong-un's first speech to the rest of the world. In April 2012, I saw a new North Korea. They carry out this novelty by not breaking away from the political and social tradition as well as ideology. Since that year, since 2012, every year until last year, I visit North Korea. Last year, I was there for twice, in September and in October. I met with Kim Jong-un personally in 2013. Oh yeah, that one is not in the paper, okay, so you cannot find it on the paper. And I see a very significant change in North Korea, really. Not only related to the physical matters, but also related to attitude of the North Korean people. They are now more open. In Jakarta, I also have good relationship with the North Korean embassy. I think we need to build good relationship to get the explanation, the answer of many questions that we have in our head. I can convince the North Korean embassy to be more open to journalists in Jakarta. They often give opportunity to my journalist friend to come to the embassy or to come to the activities organized by the embassy. In fact, one of the first activities by Ambassador An Kwang-il in Jakarta was visiting Indonesian Journalists Association office and have a discussion with many senior journalists at the time. My colleagues, regarding to the reunification of the two countries, I think we should realize that reunification is a constitutional duty in North Korea and also in South Korea. Their leaders in the past, especially after the Cold War ended, held a series of peace talks in that direction. The leaders of the two countries at the previous meetings agreed that reunification of the two Korea is a joint work of the Korean people and carried out in an atmosphere of peace and brotherhood. They expect that the final form of reunification will be the result of conversation among Koreans without the interference of other parties. As far as I am concerned, the peace process between the two Korea often disturbed by the third parties. The concern is that there will be a political change in this region that could harm their geostrategic and economic interests. They, the third parties, just do not want to have that new condition. Last year, we witnessed significant progress in inter-Korean talks. The leaders of the two countries have met 3 times, twice at Panmunjom and once in Pyongyang. This is an extraordinary progress, I believe. The leaders of the two countries have demonstrated their capacity as heads of state in moving forward to the national and brotherhood agenda. I think as a journalist, we all need to guard this agenda too by giving our contribution as journalists so that peace can really happen in this region. We are witnessing the North Korea with open hearts entering the arena of civilized talk. Kim Jong-un has met twice with President Donald Trump. The first meeting was in Singapore. I was there last year. And the second meeting was in Vietnam last month. I was also there. So far, despite the absence of written agreement in the second meeting, I think The meeting of the two heads of state gave satisfactory result. In conflict study, a peace agreement required essential elements. And you may like or not, but patience is also among the elements. I should say that I am optimistic enough for the result in the future. My colleague, I think this is the very best way I can do to complete the puzzle of information and values that we need to see peace manifest on the Korean Peninsula. I suppose we all understand that sometimes and oftentimes reporters, journalists see a conflict situation from a combative lens, as if all conflicts must end with dramatic clashes. Nevertheless, we have to remember that each conflict has unique dynamic from time to time. It is our responsibility to understand the overall dynamics so that we can get a complete picture and finally find a more positive and constructive perspective. Working as a journalist should not be intended to explode, to start a new war, which in other words could threaten our civilization. Dear colleagues, that's my view. Sharing my experience with you here is such an honor given the level of expertise I know is gathered here today. I only hope I can contribute like adding pixels to make the picture clearer, to a better understanding and a climate of peace. Kamsahamnida.
Thank you, Daegu. And any question about Daegu's presentation? Okay, we will question later. Thank you. Thank you, Daegu. As a moderator, I have to apologize. The Vice President Woo-seok Choi has some urgent matter, so he is not here today. But instead, he has a excellent presentation material. The page number is 35 to quite a long presentation, 54. So maybe he will tell about his PowerPoint presentation later. Thank you. Yeah. So, and last presenter is Alex Talquinio. She is the president of the National Society of Professional Journalists, United States of America. She will present about free press, light, the way forward.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I would like to thank our hosts at the Journalists Association of Korea. As the president of the Society of Professional Journalists in the United States, I'm honored to speak to such a distinguished gathering of global journalists. We meet here at a pivotal moment on the Korean Peninsula. Many of you are visiting South Korea for the first time. Those of you who were here at the World Journalist Conference last year will remember the hopeful political climate at that time. We met a week after South and North Korean athletes marched arm in arm into the stadium of the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. That was such a surprising sight after a nerve-wracking period of North Korean missile and bomb tests, which began with the North conducting its first intercontinental ballistic missile test on July 4th, 2017, provocatively, I believe, the same day as the United States celebrated its National Independence Day. Yet more ICBM launches followed, and most alarmingly, the country's sixth and most powerful nuclear test, which it claimed was a hydrogen bomb. I think it's important to remember where we were a year ago as we look back and reflect on recent incidents. Amid those fearful developments, bellicose taunts were exchanged between the leaders of North Korea and the United States. Who can forget President Donald Trump calling Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man, or Kim denouncing him as a dotard? Nevertheless, the world was forced to sit up. It could hardly do otherwise, given the seriousness, because even though this name-calling was schoolboyish, the words were backed by nuclear arsenals. Then, just as startling, we journalists around the world gathered here last February heard the announcement that the U.S. president had agreed to a bilateral summit with the North Korean leader. All this augured well for a step forward toward world peace. Since then, for the past year, close observers of the events here on the Korean Peninsula have been witnesses to a 5-act drama. In the first act, the global press speculated about where, when, and even if the two men would meet. Then the world was mesmerized by the theatricality of the Singapore summit, which turn more on the personal chemistry of the principals rather than on the preparations of professional diplomats. In the months of uncertainty following the initial summit, which did not produce much in terms of concrete results, questions emerged about the utility of bilateral negotiations at the highest level. Then came the disappointment of the Hanoi summit, which ended prematurely without a formal declaration. And finally, satellite images have recently pointed to the rebuilding of testing facilities in the north. As this story played out, journalists have been there every step of the way, documenting not only the words of the principal protagonists, but also the insights of political operatives and policy experts, the history of the Korean Peninsula, and public reactions to the high-stakes nuclear negotiations. In short, they have not stinted to report on the hope, the danger, and yes, the occasional absurdity of the situation. In monitoring these unfolding momentous events, it has been refreshing and an inspiration to note how press freedom has improved by leaps and bounds here in South Korea. While you tour the country this week, as I did last year, you'll see dozens of national and regional newspapers on newsstands. The current government can rightfully boast that it helped heal a longstanding rift at the national broadcasters, and the country jumped ahead 20 places in the Reporters Without Borders 2018 World Press Freedom Index. This renaissance of the free press here, part of a broader trend of growing freedoms in the country since the late 20th century, goes hand in glove with the culture of innovation and progress here. In the span of a few generations, South Korea has evolved from a poverty-stricken, war-torn land to one of the wealthiest and most vibrant of the global economies. And we Americans are proud to call South Korea our ally and one of our most stalwart. From the standpoint of the organization I represent, the Society of Professional Journalists, a free press is like a beacon that, by radiating the light of truth outward, helps expose to the public gaze even the most sophisticated subterfuges. By contrast, limiting the coverage, our coverage of negative outcomes darkens the way forward. Of course, when we talk about concepts such as press freedom and impartiality, we are discussing ideals. These are goals that we as journalists must constantly strive toward, rather than destinations to attain. In some countries, there are still many roadblocks along the way. Without a strong judicial framework protecting the free flow of information, governments can cut off access to news outlets, and journalists may work at their own peril. In such difficult cases, we need not only journalists dedicated to the highest ethical standards of the profession, but also a legal community in support of freedom of information and of the press. Journalists are widely perceived to be the eyes and ears of the public. They are not diplomats. They do not represent their government, nor do they speak for special interests, such as political parties or social groups which they may privately identify with. When events take a turn for the worst, when summits, for example, collapse without results, when there is evidence of retrenchment, they must focus on the events as they unfold. To be sure, there is more than simply firsthand reporting. There is, as we mentioned, legitimate a role for opinion journalism. This goal of denuclearization warrants plenty of opinion pieces, but they should be clearly indicated as such. That permits readers and viewers to understand that the selection of facts has been guided by the desire to validate an opinion. But reporters writing the first draft of history, particularly those covering crucial events such as nuclear disarmament negotiations that so profoundly influence world peace, should render a full and impartial account of events. It is especially important that a free press functioning in an open society behaves responsibly by focusing on the legitimate security concerns of each side, but it should not omit to report on troubling developments. Journalists must report what is done, what is said, and whenever possible, what is unsaid. To obtain the fullest possible picture of key events, like the summits with North Korea, it is important to cover the public reaction. After the Hanoi summit, for example, the Washington Post published an account of the disappointment felt by many here in South Korea. One South Korean expert described his fellow citizens as heartbroken. A free press provides an impartial chronicle, and in this case informed Americans of the sentiments of their allies halfway around the world. With such high stakes, the public has a right to a complete and realistic an account of events as possible. As the Washington Post's own logo proclaims, democracy dies in darkness. When reporting on nuclear negotiations, this adage may be taken literally as well as figuratively. A story of the scope and potential impact of the nuclear negotiations on the Korean Peninsula is naturally of interest in every country around the world. You'll each produce stories during your time here for your compatriots back home. The greatest contribution that we as journalists can make to the peace on the Korean Peninsula is to report back honestly and fully what we see here. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Alex. Any question about Alex's presentation? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alex. Now we have like a group discussion about 4 presentators' presentation. Each presenter has represented their countries reporting about Korean Peninsula matter. So do you have any question about a specification about how they reporting and some question about each countries? Okay.
Everything we heard here.
Would you tell where you are and?
Yeah, I'm from Cyprus. I'm
Cyprus.
the director of Kathimerini newspaper. I've been fortunate enough in my career to cover such events as Intifada, to be at the reunification of the 2 Germanies, that special night, which was more of a tourist attraction than a political event then. I'm speaking about the day as such. There was 500,000 Americans and 30,000 East Germans, and when in the morning I took a taxi to go, I was at the flat in West Berlin, and I asked the taxi driver, which we consider them the barometer of society, what do you think of what happened today? He was a West Berliner. He said, if you just knock at the door of a West Berliner now, it was 6 o'clock in the morning, he will tell you, build the wall 6 meters higher. And I said, why? Because he said, you have to consider why you didn't see West Berliners tonight, why the West Germans were not at the reunification. It's because the period before that, when the borders of the former socialist countries opened, West Berlin became an awful city because the rents went up to the sky. Prostitution was bread and salt. The prices were very high. There were lines, queues outside the supermarkets. So I mean to say that there are things going on that you have to take into consideration if you are going to be fortunate enough in Korea to see that day of the reunification. So you have to be, my dear friends from Korea, ready about that special day, and you have to face it in a way that the South Korea will not feel obliged or will feel as if it's going to take the burden of their unification. It is going to take the burden, yes, because the other half is so poor, it cannot stand any burden. This is one thing. Second, I think that the conference, we came from 30 countries of the world. The conference should give us the opportunity to listen to people who are dealing with such delicate issues like the military. I mean, you told us that there is a dialogue between the two sides, between the militaries, and we need information about this dialogue. Most of us, we write articles every day or once a week, and most of those articles are